So, Adrian, you've been doing your column in The Guardian and been reading a few of those. Is it, rather than being kind of told what to talk about, I take it must be quite sort of, quite new to you, quite relaxing, that you can actually pick your choice, is that right?
No, it makes it harder. I mean, I've got to come up with 1,000 words about absolutely anything. And that is much harder than somebody said, look, you've got to write something about sofas every week. I would find a sofa-related story. And as it stands at this particular moment, I have no clue what I'm going to write for tomorrow. And I'm going to have to get something in by 1 o'clock, even though I'm on radio tomorrow morning and driving to London tonight. So if somebody could come and stab me or something, perhaps not fatally, that would at least give me something to write about. You know, it gets that desperate.
Okay, that's a good start. So the obvious question, how did this journey, how did it start? I mean, what was your, because I know you didn't, I mean, you weren't a footballer or you weren't an athlete, were you? Or,
no,
I
I didn't really start in football. I started in business journalism because I got some work experience at the BBC at Television Centre, having done a journalism sort of post-grad course, and that happened to be on television business programmes. So I found a bit of a niche. I enjoyed putting business language into plain English, mainly because I just didn't understand what they were blathering on about. It was all like watching Succession or something to me, a load of people mumbling in jargon. So that really worked. So, that really worked for me. I really enjoyed it. And also, it helped having a Midlands accent because expectations were so low when they heard me. They just assume you're stupid. I'm serious. And then all I had to do was string a sentence together, and they looked at me like I was Stephen Hawking or something, like an absolute bloody genius. But I hadn't done anything, they just thought I was completely stupid, and anything better than completely stupid made me look clever.
Yeah, because that was I used to watch it actually. It was a program called Working Lunch you worked on.
Yeah.
I enjoyed that. That was great. But then I thought, actually, all the people that should be watching this, they're all at work.
Yeah, there was a lot of people work from home, was our theory. And look, somebody said to me right at the start, one of my colleagues said, it's never going to work because it's a business program for people who aren't interested in business. And on the face of it, he's right. But on the other hand, it did kind of work for that reason. And it's amazing how if I'm in London, over in the city, there'll be some wise guy, probably about 30, who'll come past me in a Ferrari, slam the brakes on, jump out and say, oh, I got into business because of you. He's watching Working Lunch in his high chair or something. And, and so I had to say, remember me and you will. So I think a lot of kids watched it, actually.
Yeah.
I really enjoyed it.
Steph McGovern, wasn't it, with you?
Steph was after I left, actually.
Right, okay.
But
yeah, she was good.
Yeah.
I mean, I guess that was a start for her too. So,
Yeah,
sure. So, I mean, so going back, and I remember I was talking about the athletics, but a pal of mine, Dave Moorcroft, and he was at the BBC at the time, and I don't know what you felt from your career in TV and media and so on, but he felt the media, the pressure in the media from people wanting his job, and he found that more competitive than actually running on the track.
Yeah.
He found, there was always, he said, there was always somebody after my job.
Well, I didn't find that. So I did at first. I was a bit insecure, but then I went from one job to the next. I was on Working Lunch for a long time, and then everything took off when I did The Apprentice, You're Fired, and I was also doing Match of the Day too, which I really enjoyed. And then the One Show started, and I got that, and then I started doing more like World Cup and Champions League football, and so I was sort of at the front of the pack. I was a front runner, and then all of a sudden in 2014 it just stopped. And then kind of that, I'd done live television every day for sort of 20 years, and suddenly it just stopped just like that. So I was sort of bewildered at my own rise and just as bewildered when it all finished.
I think it's interesting what you were saying about the people didn't expect much. And I think that, I've worked in the Midlands, especially around Coventry and Warwickshire for a long, long time, and they don't, do they? But I think what I've followed you for, I have to admit, I've followed you for quite a while. And what I did like about you was the fact that you just seem to get on with it, which is like with the Midlands, that's what we do.
Yeah.
We don't bang on about it. I mean, all the time you switch on Radio 4, Radio 5, and it's always the Northern Powerhouse or the South East or whatever.
Yeah.
We just don't bang on about it, do we?
No, that's right. I mean, I think it's greatly to the credit of Brummies particularly that we don't big ourselves up. Glaswegians will tell you they're the greatest. Scousers, Cockneys, Geordies, Manx, they're the worst of all. But Brummies just don't big themselves up all the place.
No.
There's a website celebrating Birmingham called birminghamitsnotshit.com, which is as much as we'll say about ourselves. But I think, I'm more comfortable like that.
Yeah.
I mean, wife's from Yorkshire. They're the worst of all.
Yeah,
God's own county, God's own country, all this. But if a bloke walks into a bar and starts saying how fantastic he is, we all think he's an idiot. But then, so why would it be any different if you're going around saying how wherever you're from is the best place ever?
Yeah, we always just thought there's that little bit in the middle.
Yeah.
We never espoused. I mean, we get on. I mean, the Commonwealth Games in Birmingham was cracking.
Yeah.
A great event. If that had been Newcastle, they'd have been going bloody balmy, wouldn't they?
Yeah. No, we just got on with it and did it. I must say, it just strikes me here. I feel almost a sense of shame walking around here, where I'm kind of part of an organisation. I work for The Guardian, I work for the BBC, I've been a journalist for years. And, most people, including me, we just walk around somewhere like this thinking, just absolutely bewildered about what goes on, about, all these, fascinating different exhibitors and everything. We all use this, but we just don't know we use it. We're right at the end of the supply chain. And I don't know, I just don't think we're as curious enough about this kind of thing. I'm not just saying that. I just think it's fascinating. It says something about us that this all kind of sort of happens in secret. It's sort of ignored.
I'm no expert either, but I know that, for instance, where I live in Coventry, years ago I worked for a training provider going into big factories. Like my old man worked at Massey Ferguson with 12,000 people. My uncle worked in a standard try with 26,000 people. And we were helping them out with funding from the government and from Brussels.
Yeah.
And when they left, I'll have to get a forklift truck course. Everybody wanted a forklift truck course, but so the problem was for them when they're going into warehousing or logistics, it's not a real job. Yeah. It's not a real job, and that was always a problem.
Well, no, but I mean, I feel very strongly it is a real job, and I feel despair. I feel despair the amount of students, the amount of 18-year-olds who go into journalism and off to study, do a degree in journalism and sports journalism. I mean, there are more sports journalists graduating every year than there have been sports journalism jobs in the history of the media. I mean, they're just being sold a lie if they're being told they're all going to get jobs at the end of this. But there's a guy, I know you've talked a lot about wellness here. I had an interesting conversation with a lad who's a runner, which is like the sort of lowest of the low in television. You just literally run around and sort things, sort the parking out, get stuff done. And I was filming something for Country File. And I said, so is this, so how long, so how long you been here? And I said, he said a month or so. I said, where were you before? He said, well, I graduated 5 years ago in television production. He couldn't get a job in television. So he'd worked as a roofer. And I went, all right, so what was that like? He said, I enjoyed it. I made good money. He said, why did you stop? He said, because I could just see it was absolutely killing the people I was working with. They were all older than me. They were sort of bent double. There were loads of sort of melanomas and that kind of thing because, they weren't sort of looking after their skin. They all smoked. They all drank. And it just struck me, these are the kind of people who should be, like you as an athlete would know, the importance of warming up at the beginning of the day and certainly stretching out at the end of the day. Now, about 1% of building site workers will be doing either of those things. And for you, it was more about performance, but for them, it's about their livelihoods. And I spoke to some eminent physios about it, and they said, yeah, they'll be absolutely knackered by the time they're sort of 40 or 50. And I just think it's something to be, something to be mindful of.
Yeah, it's interesting when you talk about people going to sports journalism. I mean, my experience was always about people who I knew in sports, and you'll probably know, I won't mention them by name, and they expect to leave their Olympic journey, whatever, call it what you like, and they'll go into work in telly, and they'll be crap. It's just because they've always been fated for doing whatever, jumping higher or running faster, and they go into almost like a real job, and just can't hack it whatsoever.
I mean, I'd be interested to know, is that why people who work in this industry, how they ended up in this industry? Is it something you want to go into? I'm not asking you to answer the question now, but it's a question that strikes me. Or is it something you've fallen into? I don't know. I'll be interested. I mean, it's very male skewed, if you don't mind me saying so. But nothing inherently wrong with that. But I do notice that. But
yeah, sure. So, like a couple of questions, but because we're watching on the TV and so on with something like the sport. I mean, is there anyone? Do you agree with this one? Never meet your heroes. Have you ever come across that?
Yes. I mean, it's. Well, generally, I don't think I've been that disappointed because their reputations have come to me before. A long time, before I've met them. But generally, what I've found out, people who are eminent in their professions who I've met. All right, some aren't my cup of tea, and some aren't. But what I've realised about the highly successful people, and it's something that some kids don't understand, and I tried to tell them this without patronising them, but we've all know when we were at school, and maybe our own kids, we all know those who sail through school without really trying, and end up with 4 A's at A level, then go to some great university, just drink and whatever else their lives at university, come away with the first, captain the football team, etc. Those are the people I worried about who are sailing through, because the lesson you've learned by the time you're in your early 20s, or the lesson you think you've learned, is that, I can wing it. I can get through life without really, really trying too hard. And that is so damaging. Because everyone I know, being like prime ministers or, footballers, Roy Keane, whatever, people in business, they all have one thing in common, is that they have worked their arses off for long periods of time, really given it everything. Now, it is about talent as well, but there are no shortcuts to success, certainly to long-term success. So, I don't know, I remember going to get my daughter's GCSE results, and she'd worked really hard, and I remember not being as panicked as I thought I was, or would be, over it. And I realised it was because what she'd shown me is that she had a capacity to work really hard. And that is actually more use in the long run than whatever GCSEs you get. Yeah. So it's what teachers always told me at school, not far from here, and you think it's bollocks at the time. They go, well, it doesn't matter what your attainment grade is, it's what your effort grade is. That's really important. I'm thinking, yeah, and the rest. But in fact, it is actually true.
And I think I've done talks at like business schools at Warwick University, and just because of the fact they used to do some sport, they invite you along. You think, well, what they also talk about, what can I talk about here? But then you sort of twig it that people in sport who are successful in sport quite often are successful in business as well.
Yeah.
The skills, attention to detail, surrounding yourself by experts. It's all very relevant, isn't it?
Yeah. There's a again, I know you've talked about sort of mental health issues and the kind of, kind of mental attitude you've got to have. And I think the reason I wouldn't get on in business, actually per se, is that there's a line in a novel by an American novelist called Richard Ford, and he just said, commerce is, if nothing else, essentially forward thinking. You've got to be positive. You've got to see opportunities. With my negative mindset, kind of what I might call the West Brom mindset, where you can see only problems everywhere, you are never going to get on in business. Some of my best mates are highly successful in the textiles industry. And, he has a knockback. And, by the end of the night, he's turned it into a positive somehow. When I get a knockback, I'm still thinking about it 25 years later and couldn't get past it. You've got to sort of move forward. And I think that's kind of what I most admire about successful people in business.
And I'm just talking about touching on the book that you've just written about drinking, is that there was one, I think I told you about it earlier on, but there's one special bit, one really key bit that I noticed about the quote, the Roy Keane quote. I don't know if you'd like to expand on that one a little bit, but that was really good.
Well, no, just Roy. Roy hadn't had a drink for about 15 years when I met him, and I wasn't drinking for Lent, and I just went round his house. I happened to be working in Manchester, and I popped round to see him in Altrincham. And he said, think about drinking. There's always Well, as I remembered it, is that he said, there's always a reason to drink. You know, you're happy, you're sad. You know, your kids have done something brilliant. Your kids have been doing your head in. Your team's lost, your team won. Somebody's died, somebody's getting married. You know, there's always a reason to drink. You're bored, you're excited. Always a reason. And when I quoted it in the book, I sent him what I'd written, and he said, yeah, you can put that in, if you like. But I didn't say reason. I said an excuse to drink. And there's a difference, and it was kind of an excuse. And that, I don't know, that really stuck in my mind. I think it's just, and that sort of changed my thinking about it slightly. I mean, the book I wrote was mainly because I realised that I was drinking a huge amount without anybody, including me, thinking I had a problem. Because we've got this idea of the alcoholic, and you think of somebody waking up in a skip or a park bench, you know, or, you know, very florid complexion or something, and I wasn't any of that, but I was drinking sort of 100 units a week without anyone noticing. And, you know, I realised I made a TV documentary about it, and I realised a lot of people were in the same boat as me, were, you know, drinking a huge amount, but because there's, you know, this, I would say, rather false image of the, you know, the classic alcoholic, then it was getting twisted in our minds. There's so many people just talk so much crap saying, I only, I don't drink during the day. I don't drink, or, I only drink at the weekends, or, I only drink spirits, or I never drink spirits, or I only drink beer, or whatever. If you're drinking a lot, it will catch up with you in the end.
Yeah. I'd never drink on a Monday apart from a bank holiday Monday. So it's the same sort of, absolutely, yeah. It's the same sort of thing. But I think the interesting thing about that as well was the fact that you weren't saying stop. That was going to be a more difficult sort of thing. And you just, like most people, you enjoy one. So why not?
Yeah, but I just realised what a lie we told ourselves. Because there's this, as you probably know, the national guidelines from the chief medical officers that you should drink no more than 14 units a week, which is 14 very small glasses of wine, or probably a bottle and a half, or 7 pints of weakish beer, or 14 shots a week. And the interesting thing is, if you ask a drinker, any drinker, what percentage of drinkers, right, so setting aside people who for religious reasons or because they're abstemious, but of all people who drink, what percentage are drinking within that 14-unit limit? Now, you ask most drinkers like me that, we'd say, well, none. Nobody drinks that little. It's a nonsense. Who drinks 14 units a week? It's nothing. Well, in fact, the truth is 70% of drinkers are drinking 14 units or less. So most drinkers are drinking moderately. But because drinkers like me surround ourselves with other drinkers, it normalises our behaviour. And the drinks industry, instead of boasting about how few people are actually drinking to excess, very cleverly, they make out that everybody is drinking. All the adverts, big parties, everyone's drinking. You can't have a good time without drinking. And it's about the social norming. If you think everyone else is doing it, you'll be more inclined to do it yourself. It's just like during lockdown, when we thought no one else was, when we thought everybody was complying with lockdown and nobody was going out, we were more inclined to comply with it ourselves. But as soon as we started seeing people walking the dogs 4 times a day, or having a picnic in the park, or doing the conga around the shopping centre, then thought, oh, sorry, I'll go out as well. We will tend to conform to the behaviour of others. And I went to university, and let's say I made 30 friends while I was at university and acquaintances. By an extraordinary coincidence, all 30 of them were drinkers. So I thought, well, everybody drinks. It's just not true. It's a lie we tell ourselves.
Yeah, I'm going back to my running. I mean, the running, you asked me if I was still around. I didn't. And I said I've got no knees left, which is true. But I've also got something called atrial fibrillation, which is a regular heartbeat. And that's something that goes to lots of elite athletes and so on. But so I went to the doctor, and just before he did a little operation, all planned or something, the usual sort of question, do you smoke? No, actually, I've never had a cigarette in my life. But then he said, do you drink? And I said, well, I know that the guidelines are supposed to be 14 units a week. And the surgeon said to me, he says, yes, Dave, but that's not really drinking, is it? Which he said, and
that's bollocks. I mean, doctors say the wrong things.
Yeah.
I wrote a chapter about this in my book. It's bizarre. I mean, after the programme had gone out, a lot of people saw it, and I was at West Brom, Birmingham City, at St Andrews on a Friday night. And at half-time, I had one amounted to a seminar for the drinkers in the crowd. They were clambering down over the seats for a word. And there was a great big black country bloke came up to me. He goes, "Aid, listen, I drink 60 pints of lager a week. Do you think that's too much?" And incredibly, I found myself taking the tone of the urbane, compassionate doctor. So, well, you might consider cutting down a little bit. And of course, it's too bloody much. But what I said to him was, look, are you enjoying every single one of them? Are you enjoying every single one of those 60 pints a week? If so, who's anyone to tell you not to drink them? Fill your boots. But are you really? And, oh, fair point. And I don't know what happened. But that was the turning point with me. I realised you counted up all the drinks I'd drunk in my life, line them up next to each other. That line would be 3 miles long. Now, that's too much. But the tragedy for me, I was thinking, how many of those did I really enjoy or want or need? And actually, it's only about a third. The rest of it is just drinking for the sake of bloody drinking. Drinking because you can't think of anything better to do. Drinking because the first drink gives you a nice feeling. But then every subsequent drink is just a vain attempt to recreate the feeling that first drink gave you. So once I'd figured that out, it was quite easy to change my thinking. But I've got to say, though, I'm often in the pub, somebody will come up to me absolutely pissed and go, "Fucking great book, Aid. Brilliant book. Really made a difference." I say, "Well, good, but keep work, keep still some work to do here by the look of it." But yeah, it is possible to drink less and and enjoy drinking more, which I've certainly have.
And still watch West Brom.
I still watch West Brom for my sins.
Yeah.
I don't talk about it. I need the summer off. Honestly, I can't talk about it.
He's going to sign some of those books up.
Okay.
If anyone...
So we've got some books later. So if anyone wants one, Adrian will sign them later on. There was just one question that somebody sort of said, ask Adrian this. Are there any, I won't say about the ones that you're not keen on, but any pundits who are your favourites, pundits that you've worked with, especially on the football?
Well, there's pundits are different to analysts. A pundit will give you an opinion. And the best of them all for me is Roy Keane, because you can work your arse off for a whole programme. All anybody will be able to remember at the end of it is something Roy Keane said. But that's kind of punditry. Analysis is different. Analysis is really hard to do. And to do it well, you've got to understand graphics. You've got to understand, well, obviously you've got to understand the game, but you've got to get it across. Because on any given passage of play, there's probably 30 different camera angles and an infinite number of ways you can show it, illustrate it, stop it, start it, reverse it, and whatever. And explaining the game, explaining what is happening in that way is really difficult. For me, Lee Dixon, I thought, was best at it, and Alan Hansen was the master of it. So, in terms of their skills doing it, then I would certainly say them. And like Gordon Strachan is sort of my best mate in that kind of business. He knew what was going to happen in matches before they happened. I'll be sitting watching a game. He said, "Oh, you might score from this." I went, "Oh yeah." And he went, "Oh, how did that happen?" And then he sits and explains it. It was bizarre. He ought to be wealthier than he is, just putting money on games, but he doesn't gamble.
Okay. So, is there any questions from the floor?
Come on, somebody ask me something. Anything? Yeah, there's one.
There you go,
There's
Justin.
one here.
In terms of business punditry, who are the best people you've worked with? What was Mickey Clark like to work with?
Oh, Mickey Clark was the Times stock market correspondent, and I worked with him when I first started on the radio. Yeah, he was brilliant. He was handled like a market trader, didn't he? And he talked about shares like you might talk about the price of oranges and lemons going up. I mean, I worked with some really gifted people who were just great at it. Just again, I knew they were good because I'd go up to them and say, "Look, I don't understand this. Can you explain?" And there was a bloke called Rory Kethlen-Jones who was fantastic. Simon Gompertz, I really, really rated him. He was the personal finance correspondent. I think Sean Farrington is fantastic. He's from just round here. He's from Wolverhampton. I must say, he's really good. If you can just cut through the jargon and explain what's happening, then sort of you're for me. And they're very rare, actually. It's very rare for people to explain business in plain English. It's very rare to find them, because normally if they're of a certain status, they'll work for big farms with big firms with PR advisors who will just fill them full of jargon and pre-prepared statements and whatnot, and you don't actually get a feel for the excitement of what's actually happening in business.
There was one that I've watched a few times, Jim O'Neill.
Yes.
He was the economist. He was really, and just that thing about, a bit like yourself, it just explains it as the layman would understand it. It was just brilliant. It's just brilliant. So, any more? Any more? Any more for any more?
Come on. There's one over
One at
there.
the back.
This man sells German robot suits.
Can we get one? Yes, I do, thank you. Could you tell me, if you had to put a very famous Brummie in a cabinet and put them on a wall, who would you put in there?
That's a good question. Well, I mean, it depends where the cabinet was going, really. If it was in a museum, I think I'll have to put Frank Skinner in there, whoever it was. He's my mate, and I've got to speak to him later because it's his son's birthday today. I'll suggest that, sort of stuffing him when he passes away, and we'll stick him in a revolving cabinet on Centenary Square or something like that.
Okay. Any more? Last one? Looks like we're all done. That's fine.
Okay.
Thanks, Adrian. Thanks very much.
Thanks very much indeed. Thank you.